Hello and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we are looking at a double review of white tea. Both of these hail from India, but from a region of India that I don't think we have looked at so far, and that is the Nilgiris, in other words, the Nilgiri Mountains, which are further south than the Himalayas and at a slightly more, a slightly less harsh climate, let's put it that way. In comparison to Darjeeling and Assam, Nilgiri doesn't have quite the clout, at least in terms of sheer volume of tea produced, and it's probably fair to say that the Nilgiris aren't quite as well known. I think it's fair to say that even those who don't enjoy tea or don't know much about it have probably seen Assam as a name on a label in a supermarket, and the same with Darjeeling, but they're less likely to be familiar with tea from the Nilgiris. Should point out that I keep almost repeating myself because Nilgiri means blue mountains, so the Nilgiris are themselves the blue mountains. So what I have here are two different Nilgiri white teas, different in that they've been plucked at a different standard. They're from different vendors, and I'm afraid to some extent there isn't much more information that I can provide. So let's just take a look at the first one here. We have Nilgiri Platinum Needles 2025, and that's from Ketlee.in. So they were harvested early last year at the time of recording, so that's 2025. And although sometimes Ketlee points out where their teas come from, and if their Nilgiri teas come from one very specific location, which we'll mention in just a mo, in this case, there's no information along those lines, although there's information about flavor profiles and brewing parameters. And here we have Nilgiri Peony, and this is nilgiritea.co.uk, which I've always accessed through James Gourmet Coffee. Now, if I understand correctly, all of the Nilgiri teas, and this I think it's the Nilgiri Tea Company, that's it, yes. All of their teas, if I understand correctly, come from the tea studio, which comes from one particular area in the Nilgiris. And the tea studio has been responsible for a great deal of experimentation. That's what they are, an experimental tea factory. Because the only way for tea from the Nilgiris to make a real impact on the market is not through sheer volume, because Assam and Darjeeling are always going to beat them on that, but it's the diversification, the attempts to produce tea that make them stand out in the market, that are distinctive and that are, well, the best quality possible. So what we have in the tea studio tea here is a white peony standard. Now I should point out that the tea studio doesn't simply make teas that you could say, well, it's part of a universal standard like white peony. There is an effort to make, for example, in their green teas that are very much in a style that's a homage to an already existing style of green tea. And that's what the kind of thing that makes these white teas from the Nilgiris stand out. It's that effort to, well, make them stand out, and also to see how far local tea can be pushed in terms of how close to some existing standards or some existing style of tea can be achieved. Now, one other thing I did take a look at is what kind of tea is grown in the Nilgiris. So far with our the non-Japanese and the non-Chinese white teas, we've found very much an abundance of Assamica types. We found that in our tea from Laos, our teas from Vietnam, and quite possibly some of the others as well. My memory's not quite got it there. However, the Nilgiris, and I hesitate to say universally because there's always going to be some exception, but the Nilgiris tend to use Camellia sinensis. In other words, the non-Assamica strain at the sort of highest umbrella term, and that's the same as is grown in Darjeeling, again, with all exemptions and exceptions put to one side. So we're not going to expect this to taste just the same as an Assamica in either case. And I don't think, if memory serves correctly, and in this case I think it does, I don't think I've had a white tea from Darjeeling. And so, leaving to one side the effect of terroir and climate, because the climate in the Nilgiris isn't the same as the climate in Darjeeling, at least we might get a sense for what the basic bedrock flavour profiles from sinensis are actually like in the form of a white tea. So we're now going to take a closer look at the teas themselves. We won't take a look at the packaging because it's standard packaging in both instances. That's not a criticism, but there's nothing that we can actually glean from the packaging, and then move on to our double review. See you in a mo. So here we are in part 2 of our video, and we're going to take a close-up look at the product, the tea leaves that we're going to be brewing. So here we are beginning with the Nilgiri Platinum Needles 2025. They look pretty similar to other silver needle teas that we've looked at in the past. The colour scheme is pretty pale. There is some green, but it's washing out into grey and some slightly yellowed pieces. The needles themselves have a kind of fairly familiar velvety kind of texture, and there's still a certain softness or a little bit of pliability to them. The smell is very fruity with a heady, almost kind of perfumey quality. On top of that, there's no sort of waft of freshness, but that fruity, slightly perfumey and heady quality. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that comes out in the finished product. Let's turn our Lazy Susan around so we can take a look at the other tea leaves. Hopefully, there we go. I kind of practiced where the saucer should be. This is Nilgiri Peony, the leaves that have been plucked, or the tea that's been plucked, let me put it that way, at the white peony plucking standard. So let's move that apart. At this point, you've got leaf rather than pure bud. You've got some stem material here that's kind of orphaned. Oh, that one's got a little bit of leaf on it. Some leaf fragments as well as whole leaves, but it depends on how long this has been in storage. And it's a cardboard packaging, so to be fair to both the people selling it and the people producing it, there's only so much you can do to protect dry leaves, especially if they're not very large to start with. In terms of the colour scheme, there is some slight outliers of thoroughly oxidized material, but on the whole, I would say this has been kept away from any kind of great degree of oxidation whatsoever. That's obviously what we expect from white peony, but over time you're going to get some kind of oxidation of the leaves because these haven't undergone kilgreen. That's one of the missing steps between white tea and green tea. So all in all, it's a relatively uniform colour palette, some lighter green and some darker green and some completely oxidized fragments. The smell here is a much more straightforward herbal and grassy smell. And again, I'd be interested to see how much of that comes out in the brewing. So let's move on to part 3. Hello again, welcome to part 3 of our video, where we are going to review these two teas. On my left is the Platinum Needle from Nilgiri, and on my right is the Peony or White Peony Standard of white tea. Let's begin by taking a look at the colour of our teas. That one is a relatively familiar colour, I would say, for a white tea. It's got that kind of silvery quality, although there is a slightly gold tinge to it. And on this side, we've got something a much more intense colour. It's a fairly intense yellow. It looks a little more gold in the light. There you go. Bit of natural light on it, not that there is much today. More of a yellow colour, I would say. Incidentally, I brewed these to the same standards, fairly standard white tea parameters. 1 gram per 100 mils of water, 85 degrees centigrade for 3 minutes. That's not to say that they have to be the same, but they're fairly standard white tea parameters. Looking at the platinum needle tea, that's a very intense smell, very sweet, lots of ripe fruit in there, slightly perfumey, slightly kind of heady quality to it. And on this side, there's a bit of fruit, but slightly spiced. It's almost savory. It's almost a slightly vegetable quality to it. Not bad, but it reminds me of something like a sweet vegetable that's been cooked. There's no earthiness to it, just that kind of sweet vegetable quality. So let's try the tasting. Let's see what this particular strain, sinensis, does to a white tea. That perfumey, heady quality is coming through on the cup. The brewing parameters aren't bad. They're pretty close, maybe a little bit hotter, but slightly longer. The flavour's dropping off. But I think that's the parameters, not the tea itself. It tastes the way it smells. It's got an intense... There is some freshness in there, some outright vegetal greenness, but it's the sweetness, it's the perfumey, heady, fruity quality. It doesn't stand out from other white teas, because we've had other ones that have a similar flavour profile, but it's very intense and it's really enjoyable. Let's try a little bit more, just to kind of collect our thoughts on that. Yes, I think the headiness, the perfuminess is something that this tea is definitely bringing to the table. And it's very enjoyable because of that. Let's try our Peony standard tea. So the smell of this off the jug was more vegetal, more sort of sweet vegetal notes. And it's the same. Excuse me. That's what I'm picking up from this. It's... Sorry, tried to not inhale tea. That's what I'm picking up. It's savoury and sweet at the same time, very vegetal. I thought there was some fruit, but it's just that the sweetness is quite complex. I don't really know what to make of that. It doesn't cooked. And the flavour's not dropping off. I think those parameters have done justice to this tea, although they might need to be tweaked slightly for the platinum needles. It's a complex sweetness, and that vegetal quality is kind of moving to the background. So let's sum up. The white tea on my left, the platinum needle, keep getting that wrong. That's quite a complex, heady, perfumey, fruity, very sweet flavour. And I think the perfumey, heady quality is what makes it stand out, or at least it's more intense. On this side, the sweetness is really complex, but there's nothing heady or perfumey. I was expecting with all that vegetal quality for it to be quite earthy, but it's not. It's still very light. I'm going to do a little experiment to see if either of them stick to the sides of the cup, as is sometimes the case. So let's take a look. Is that viscous enough to be... No, I don't think it is in either case. So, are they both enjoyable? Yes, they're both bringing something very different to proceedings. The Platinum Needle, lovely fruity platinum, fruity, heady, perfumey quality, and this side something more robust with a very complex sweetness. Are they easy to get hold of? Well, I've seen white teas and I've seen a variety of teas from Nilgiris in other places, although as always I would urge you, if you're interested and it's possible, please do go through the Nilgiri Tea Company and Ketlee.in, simply because it seems the polite thing to do given I am reviewing their products. Both very enjoyable for different reasons and both very easy to steep. So, very interesting and a hearty recommendation on both, but on slightly different grounds. So, happy steeping as always, and God bless.